fantastic presentation so far. I really enjoyed taking some notes, really enjoyed some of the ideas here. The persistence of uncertainty really definitely hits home, definitely feel that. I think one thing that is certain is the cyber attacks that we continue to see. And so what I'm going to talk about today is very much practical ways that we can look at securing identities in the digital world. So we'll jump right in here. First of all, just on a level set, identities, we all have identities in our personal space, we all have identities in our workplace. The thing that I'm going to be focusing on today is the workplace. So workplace identities, not to be confused with our identities on Facebook or X or other places. We'll be focusing on the workplace. And as it's been discussed today, it's really changed significantly over the last few years with COVID, with everyone working from home. I had some meetings this week and we're talking to folks, how many days do you come into the office now? It's 1 or 2 days a week, the rest is at home, right? So it's really important that we figure this out. However, the other thing is, I ask everyone about their identity, their workplace identity. Is it 100% in the cloud? Everyone's moving to the cloud. And kind of get, kind of funny looks, little smirks. No, we still have on-prem. Gartner says 97% of organizations are hybrid. Only 3% are actually 100% in the cloud, right? Why is this? It's because we still have things like file servers. We still have things like databases. We still have things in the financial sector like mainframe. Mainframe was supposed to be retired. We were talking about, retiring those in 2010, 2012. They still persist. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? A lot of the industries that I talk to are industries that are in manufacturing, in retail, law firms, grocery chains. These are organizations that have just been kind of clicking along for a long time, staying out of the fray. Maybe they're not a household name, they're not a big bank where the attackers have been going after. However, now they've become a target and are really having to up their game. They're really having to leap forward in identity security. However, they still have on-prem legacy systems. And the one that we're going to talk about mostly today is Active Directory. So if I could get a show of hands, does anyone have Active Directory in this room? Okay, a few kind of short hands like this. It's out there, it's persistent, right? It's not going away. Even with the migration to the cloud, even with, again, Microsoft is a big business partner of ours, even with all of the great technology like single sign-on and Microsoft Authenticator and some of the things like passwordless that makes our life easier, it's not going away, right? We've got all these different things that we need to access that are in the cloud, that are on-prem. And the challenge is it introduces very high volumes of interconnectivity. Very few systems are just in the cloud or just on on-prem. They're interconnected. This creates complexities. This creates blind spots, which we'll talk about 2 specific blind spots in a couple minutes, and obviously creates an opportunity for attackers. I'm going to go through an attack that probably was relevant to most of us here from a couple years ago, attack on Uber. And we'll talk about some of the things that were already discussed today, like social engineering and mistakes that were made and how attackers took advantage of that, but also how they were able to basically go from cloud to on-prem and back again very seamlessly because of this interconnectivity that is prevalent with most organizations that we speak with. So I mentioned the 2 gaps. Look, there's lots of gaps that we can talk about, so we're going to boil it down to 2 that are just very focused today. We're going to talk about the MFA gap. Everyone knows what MFA is. All right, I talked to my 80-year-old father-in-law. He knows what MFA is. So I'm looking at you. Sorry, Sir Graham. Teed yourself up for that one. But he knows what it is. Why? Because when he goes to his bank account, he has to get out his phone. He has to turn it on. It's not usually turned on. And he has to get this code, right? He knows what it is. It's ubiquitous. It's table stakes. Any of the security requirements, so you look at NIST, you look at any of the regulations, MFA is a top 1 or 2 requirement. It should be everywhere, right? It should be everywhere. We'll talk about why it's not, and we'll talk about why it's a challenge and why it's a gap. The second one, and we're kind of getting to the point where we almost have to leapfrog this and have service accounts be the number 1 gap. It doesn't matter who I talk to, if it's a CISO, if it's a CIO even, this is at that level of awareness. And it didn't occur to me as to why this was such a prevalent issue, especially at the C level, until I talked to a CISO in the Bay Area of a large retailer a few months ago. I said, Owen, I've known him for a long time. Why do you know about this? Why do you're CISO? You're an executive, right? You report to the board. Why do you know about service accounts, machine-to-machine accounts, non-human identities? Why do you know about this? And he said, it's simple. I have to sign off on the exception of why we haven't rotated all our passwords for service accounts, why I haven't secured all of our service accounts every single year. I have to sign off on the exception. And it's a persistent issue that goes on every single year. So we'll talk about service accounts. I'll kind of sprinkle it in here and there, but it's very relevant to a lot of the conversations that we're having. Cyber insurance, right? You do the best that you can to protect against these cyber attacks, and then you have insurance for that situation that does happen, right? Top 3 cyber insurance carrier that we talked to, their cyber expert said, look, more than 90% of our ransomware claims involve Active Directory and compromised credentials, right? And so does anyone have cyber insurance? Has anyone filled out the 44-page questionnaire times 8 different brokers? They're all different questionnaires. So what they're trying to do is minimize risk. And they have a very interesting objective and motivation. It's not necessarily governmental compliance, like checking a box for making sure that you don't get fined or audited. They're about making money. And if they write a policy for you and you are a high risk because you don't have things like MFA everywhere or protecting your highly privileged service account identities, they could potentially lose money on you. So they're going to write you a lower policy coverage. They're going to write in exceptions. And so this is something that's very interesting to me because it's a commercial compliance regime that's really bringing things to a point. We'll talk about that a little bit. So what is this MFA blind spot? You've got a user account, right? It's going to authenticate to some sort of applications. Active Directory on-prem is its sort of single sign-on. And what the attackers are doing, and this is not where we help, is they're compromising credentials. They're stealing credentials. There's 1,000 ways to do this. You can buy credentials on the dark web. You can get them through phishing. We just had a conversation around phishing training and just how prevalent and easy it is because we're so busy and distracted to compromise. So it's not necessarily about the compromised credential. That is something that's interesting and important, but that's not what we're focused on. We're assuming that the credentials are compromised. This is a zero trust approach. Where we're focusing on is the blind spots. So command line interfaces is something that attackers love. PowerShell is the #1 artifact every single year that the attackers are using. Why? Because our system administrators are also using it, because it's command line, because it's a legacy system that is impossible to add MFA to without doing unnatural acts. And I say unnatural acts, I mean proxies, agents, breaking everything down, creating huge barriers for people to do their jobs. So they get access to Active Directory, and then what do? Their goal is really to propagate. So when we talk about things like ransomware, the goal is to get to and elevate my privileges, to elevate my identity capabilities so that I can then spread throughout the organization. So how does ransomware spread so quickly? It's through identity, and it's through systems like Active Directory. And this is why the insurance industry is so focused on Active Directory and adding things like MFA as a ubiquitous control to something like this. The challenge again is that these old systems, these command line interfaces, they just don't support MFA. They were developed before we were carrying these phones around in our pockets, right, to do MFA. They predate MFA. I love this. Has anyone seen this before on LinkedIn? It's kind of been going around a little bit. We have this false sense of security. I've got MFA for RDP. I've got MFA for my SAML-enabled cloud applications. Good job. That's a step in the right direction. You need to have it. The bad guys don't care. Right? They're going around the gate. They're using command line tool interfaces like PowerShell and PSExec. They're using WMI. They're going into file shares. They're using service accounts. And again, I'll talk about different aspects of the kill chain that have been used in real life in a later example. So MFA blind spot, and this is something that I usually get a lot of heads nodding when I talk to organizations. Are any of these things relevant? Do you have command line tools with lack of visibility? Do you have file systems or legacy databases? Do you have bespoke systems that you can't upgrade the code, that you can't replace? Do you have network devices? So the cyber insurers are saying you need MFA for firewalls, routers, switches. Well, how do I have MFA to a router? How is that even possible? And then in some cases, depending on the industry, defense in particular, we see air-gapped environments. We also see air-gapped environments in specialized research. We see it in oil and gas where they're air-gapped just because they're off in remote locations. This is a blind spot for adding something, again, as ubiquitous and modern as MFA. And this is where the attackers are really living off the land. And so, he thinks about things like PS exec, I mentioned PowerShell, RDP, legacy applications. If we can extend MFA to these systems, we're basically blocking the attackers from using these systems as a way to propagate ransomware. Usually we talk to identity folks and we talk to security folks. When we talk to identity folks, for them, MFA is MFA. They have a requirement, they implement MFA, you have to do two-factor authentication, you can't go forward unless you pass it. When we talk to security folks, specifically those within that have been doing it for a while, they've been burned so many times on IPS and IDS, on putting firewall policies in place that then block things that they shouldn't. And so they've almost been preconditioned to say, I'm not going to block, I'm just going to send everything to the SOC. And I'm going to do alert, I'm going to do incident management, and I'm going to do my best to just normalize all this information and follow up as quickly as possible. That doesn't help if they're moving this fast, right? And so MFA is a great, elegant tool to stop someone, and the worst thing that can happen is you inconvenience them for a moment to go get that token to continue their day, to continue productivity. But if it's a bad guy and you're able to implement MFA on some of these protocols, you've just stopped them in their tracks. You've just stopped the attack. You've stopped it cold. Service accounts. Again, this is probably leapfrogging MFA now in terms of the number one identity gap that we talk about. And the challenge is these non-human identities are difficult to protect. They have high privileges, unknown dependencies. They're regularly abused. When I talk to organizations, especially those that have been around for a while, that are old and messy, they say, I actually talked to one a little while ago, they said, look, we don't even know where all our services accounts are. We don't know what the dependencies are, and we're afraid to do anything about it because it could break applications in the business. So you think about good things like password rotation. How many people have broken an application by rotating a password because there was hidden dependencies attached to that password for the application that you're rotating? This happens all the time. And this is why traditional privileged access management implementations tend to go so slow, is because they break down. Because after you've broken a couple applications, you slow that project way down, you become very thorough, you make sure you don't break anything, and the project squeezes to a halt. So this is a challenge that we hear a lot with service accounts. And so some of the things I'll talk about and how we do it, it's really a simple steps. It sounds simple. We'll get to the architecture: discovery, monitoring, access policies, and then activate, right? Similar to other types of approaches that you've seen. We'll talk about what that means in the context of service accounts. So here's the attack I was going to talk about. This is Uber. Again, this goes back to September 2022. The attack started first with something called MFA bombing. It's also known as MFA fatigue. And it takes advantage of what our last speaker was just talking about, which is that we're so busy and we're so inundated. What they do is they keep trying to access with the stolen credential, which prompts the MFA to the user, and your phone is buzzing, and you're in this presentation, you're embarrassed that your phone is buzzing, you want to make it stop. So what do? You hit the green button. Right? You hit the red button, it keeps buzzing, you hit the green button, it stops buzzing. Problem just goes away, right? Social engineering. This is how they got in. The contractor that they popped, he was actually denying the MFAs. So it was good behavior. Right? He was denying the MFAs. They took it one step further. They called via WhatsApp and they said, hey, this is the IT department. We've been MFAing you. We need you to go ahead and accept that, which he then did, which enabled them to get in, right? So this is the kind of stuff that they're doing, and it's tough. I'll talk about how we can stop the notion of MFA bombing. They then got into a shared folder, so a CIFS folder, something that cannot be protected by MFA traditionally, right? Then they were able to get into the vault. So everyone's familiar with the privileged access management, a PAM vault. This is where all the secrets are. We put everything in the vault. I just need to get into the vault, and now I've got access to everything. This is what they did, and this is how they got access to the system. So these systems were not just on-prem, but they got into the vault on-prem and then gave them access to everything in the cloud. So where can we stop this if we look at the kill chain? First of all, stop MFA bombing or MFA fatigue. If the user has said, no, this is not me, 3 times in the last 2 minutes, why would I keep sending him MFA response or MFA tokens, right? Go ahead and basically throttle that to say the user's already told me it's not him. Send that to the SOC, because this is now a crowdsourcing. The user is telling me I'm under attack. This should go to the top of the incident response queue within the SOC, because the user's just told me, this is not me, this is not me. this is not me, stop sending me MFA. So that's one way to stop this social engineering. The next thing is pretty obvious, add MFA for file shares. We could have stopped it here if there was a MFA control on this unprotectable system. Service account restrictions. They got a hold of a service account which they then use to access a system that it normally doesn't do. So because a service account is widely privileged, it has access to lots of things. They're able to abuse that even though this was an abnormal access by this particular service account. So have some fencing in of the privileges and force a least privileged model. And then the last thing was, again, protecting access. The service account identities shouldn't have been accessing all these different systems. So lots of different opportunities there. I'm going to share just a quick recorded demo. Does anyone recognize this command line interface? I believe this is PowerShell, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. So this is an example of what happens in real world. So this is basically now going to single sign-on. So I've gone from command line interface to single sign-on with Microsoft. This is an authenticator from Azure. I clicked yes, it's me, and now I can get in and continue on my way with PowerShell. So we're basically adding MFA to something that was previously impossible to protect with MFA. We're adding a cloud-based MFA that you already have. You already have this user experience protecting your SAML-based cloud applications. You already have Microsoft Azure. It's part of your E3 license. It's part of your E5 license. We've taken this user experience that's already there, that people understand, that are comfortable with, that have been trained on, and extending it to systems that were previously impossible to extend this MFA to. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is the notion. So that's great, Drew. How do you do that? How do you do that without basically unnatural acts like you mentioned before? What is the architecture? I'll talk about that really briefly, and then we're over here at the booth if you want to talk about it more. The idea here was we didn't want to put agents on the endpoints. We didn't want to put proxies or anything in front of the applications. We wanted to do this in a way that was elegant, that could be deployed very quickly with low friction. Right? Everything sounds great, but if it takes 3 years to deploy and you have to put agents everywhere and change your entire architecture, it's not so great anymore. So what did we do? We took advantage of existing infrastructure. So we worked with Microsoft to develop a lightweight service. It's not an agent because it doesn't have a database. It doesn't require a reboot. It's not a kernel type of an agent. It's a service that we install on the domain controller, and it basically makes the domain controller a traffic cop. And what we do, that service holds on to the authentication for a moment and asks Silverfort, which is a virtual appliance in your secure environment, either on-prem or in the cloud, for a second opinion. Silverfort analyzes that, looks for risk. If it sees something that's risky, we can then introduce the MFA of your choice out of band. So even if it's a command line interface or a legacy system like in the manufacturing environment, we've seen some very legacy type systems, I can introduce a modern cloud-based Microsoft authenticator and single sign-on control. So this is for human users. What about non-human users? This is where we introduce the notion of virtual fencing. So we learn what's normal in terms of what the service account normally does. It goes from A to B, A to B, A to B. We learn that over time. When an attacker then compromises that service account and tries to go A to C and A to D, we can stop it. How do we stop it? We just tell AD, don't let that authentication go through. Just deny it. So we're not putting in place firewalls and micro segmentation and all this kind of stuff. We're using the existing infrastructure to be that traffic cop. So this is really the key for how we do this. It's an elegant way to do it without causing a lot of disruption. The user doesn't know that Silverfort's there. They all of a sudden get their modern identity control that you have elsewhere to old systems. The service account doesn't know we're there. The application doesn't know it. The attacker doesn't know we're there. And this is also important. We're not tipping our hand to the attacker to say why their PowerShell session just timed out. It just timed out because AD said, no, you can't go forward. So this is really the meat of it. This is kind of the how we do it. And then finally, we send it to the SIM. Now, I had a meeting yesterday with a large company here, and the identity team was saying, how do we sell this to the SOC? The SOC's already busy. They get so many alerts. They get millions of alerts every single day. How do we sell this to the SOC? And one of the guys, actually a former Microsoft guy on the call, said, it's simple. We will basically sell to them that we're going to give them higher fidelity signal because the signal that we give them is going to be crowdsourced by our user. Our users are going to be saying, no, this is not me. And that's the signal that we'll send to the SIM. We'll send it to the SIM when the user's saying, I don't know why I'm getting this MFA. I've denied it a few times. Send that to the SIM because now we've crowdsourced and we're trusting our users to tell us when they're under attack. I've just got, I think, 60 seconds left, so I'll talk about kind of the journey here. Usually it starts with visibility, and so you can work with ITC. They can put this in as a test, as basically a risk assessment, and we can see what's going on in your environment, right? We can see what's going on with your authentication pipeline, and usually this is eye-opening. Why? Because there's usually a lot of junk. There's things that are passwords that have been set from years ago that are failing, that are causing load on your identity infrastructure, as an example. We usually then extend MFA to unprotectable systems, start virtual fencing those service accounts, and then you're set up for stopping these identity-based attacks, these ransomware attacks, the lateral movement. In some cases, if you're already kind of jumping ahead to cloud migration, we can also work with your Microsoft environment and actually bridge AD to Azure AD. So within your Azure console, you will start to see stuff that's going on with AD. And your users will get that single sign-on experience even if they're on-prem accessing an old application. So this is a little bit more advanced, but very cool, a way to kind of modernize your old systems without doing a forklift from one place to the next. Last thing, and it was exciting yesterday, we just announced yesterday that we raised $116 million in a Series D round. Very excited about this. Not a lot of companies are having up rounds right now, and I think it really speaks to just the industry and what we're doing and that low friction approach to help solve this problem. So really excited about this. Again, we'll be over here if you have any questions. Very much thank you for your time.